Showtime.
Welcome back to Gamesplaining, the podcast where I, Eric Crosby, a self-described video game aficionado, attempt to explain a video game of my co-host Jake Clark's choosing in as concise a way as possible. I feel like concise might be a misnomer at this point. Maybe in as interesting a way as possible. And we are now welcoming you, the listener, back to episode 5. Take it away, Jake.
Hello, friend. With this game,
Is that related to the game? Is that
that is not, because if I
okay?
did it in relation to the game, I think there would have been a much weirder one, and you're about to realize why.
Okay.
So, the game I am talking about is, do you know how? So, it's one word. There's one word, and so the two syllables, right? So the first syllable, right? So suppose you're out in the Black Forest with your mana bond, and suddenly you hear this sound, and you see, oh, that is a big floof. We must give the floof meats and pets, and then several millennia later, we will have a dachshund. So that is the first syllable. And then the second syllable is, either a stone or a glass. And it doesn't matter unless you want to drink some beer out of it, which means it very frequently does matter. Because if you drink beer out of a stone, turns out terrible for holding beer, and you lose some teeth. It's very bad to lose some teeth.
I have some bad news for you, Jake. I guessed what it was the moment you started speaking in a German accent. We're talking about Wolfenstein. Yes?
What gave you that idea?
I love it. I love it. That was good. Yeah, Wolfenstein is a good piece of gaming history. That's a good one to go back to. Wow. Yeah, that's an oldie. Give me your understanding of these games. What made you choose this one?
Well, so I was doing this a little bit ago. I was thinking about this a bit ago, and I don't know what Wolfenstein is about, other than there's Nazis. There's a lot of Nazis. One of the things I was thinking about doing was Aldo Rain's bit from Inglourious Bastards. Nazi ain't got no humanity. They're the foot soldiers of the Jew hate mass murder maniac, and they need to be destroyed. But I thought that was going to come on a little intense for the start. So
Maybe.
Hello.
Maybe.
I have studied this period in history pretty heavily, the literature of it, some of the history of it, and the discussion around sort of the aesthetic of Wolfenstein is a Wolfenstein or Wolfenstein.
I say Wolfenstein. I think that's just the American way to say it. I don't know.
The aesthetic around Wolfenstein is really important to kind of consider how we view Nazis, we view this, what I would call Nazi classic flavor. Because there are also, I don't know if you've heard about this, a very distressing group of people called neo-Nazis.
I'm familiar, yeah.
Yeah.
Not personally, mind you, but I'm familiar with the concept, yeah.
They're not the finest specimens of humanity.
No, I would argue not.
Ironic for the avowed ambassadors of racial purity, they tend to be a rather dysgenic group of people.
Yeah.
And these guys, there's connections to it, and I'm always skeptical of the idea of, these are flashpoints for entry into it, but there is a sizable bit of scholarship that I've read that usually points to Wolfenstein as part of a series of examples of bits of culture that make the Nazis look really cool. And this coincides with the progress of time making, again, Nazi classic flavor seeming unreal. So the cool aesthetic makes it easier to overshadow or look past the whole proprietorship of the genocide and so forth.
Yeah.
Genocides, there were quite a few. And there's that one got a little dark. I do also know, I've heard, apparently Dracula is involved.
Is Dracula involved? I don't remember Dracula being part of it, but... Well, I think that will speak to my my knowledge of the game series. So I should say I've only played the original Wolfenstein, like the first Wolfenstein game from 1980 something, and I've played the newer games as well. So that being Wolfenstein: The New Order and Wolfenstein: The New Colossus. Those are and Youngblood. Sorry, Youngblood is the most recent one. I played that one as well. So I'm mostly familiar with the more modern Wolfenstein games, those being the ones from about 2013 onward, I believe. But I have played the original as well, albeit in a much more limited capacity. So I was not aware that Dracula was part of it. That's news to me.
Well, he may not be. I might be confusing it with Anno Dracula. I don't know why.
Well, it'll be a mystery to us. Maybe the listeners can let us know the Dracula connection. Man, there's a really exciting phenomena that we can discuss later, relating very specifically to Wolfenstein and the neo-Nazi movement. But I'd like to get to that closer to the end because it's a doozy, and I think we need to do some building up to it first.
Please do.
So yeah, so I've already told you what I've played of Wolfenstein before, and what I can tell you of the gameplay is that it's actually, compared to the other games that we've discussed so far, it's probably the most brutally like utilitarian, simple gameplay of all the games we've discussed. You know, we talked about LA Noire, which is extremely mechanically complex in terms of, you know, you can shoot, you can run, you can drive, you can interrogate, all that stuff. We talked about Bioshock, which has all these powers, you know, guns, it's got hacking, it's got dialogue, you know, exploration, all this stuff. And what the hell did we talk about in the first episode again?
Resident Evil.
Resident Evil, yeah, Resident Evil being like survival horror. So, you know, there's crafting, there's, you know, avoiding enemies, there's escaping, there's shooting, there's all this stuff. Wolfenstein is very straightforward. It is simply a shooter. Like, it is not a shooter RPG. It is not a, you know, strategy shooter or a tactical shooter. It is just one of the old school shooters, like your old Dooms, basically. You got enemies, you run forward and you shoot them up. You kill them good, and you kill them good with whatever guns you want. And Wolfenstein's quite famous for its ridiculous arsenal. Like, we're talking about a man dual wielding assault rifles that are probably about as large as your average human. Like that's the level of like Warhammer 40,000-esque gun escalation that goes on in these games. And now, importantly, you are always killing the Nazis. Never are you fighting alongside them, which I think puts it at an interesting crossroads in gaming, given that a lot of games that are actually based in World War II, like, you know, more historical games, like, you know, say your strategy games like Company of Heroes, or your kind of multiplayer shooter games like Battlefield, you can play as the Nazis. You always can. You know, Hearts of Iron, you can go through these weird alternate history scenarios where you're playing as Democrat Hitler and stuff like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I think aesthetically Wolfenstein does right compared to those games, because those games have their own kind of deep problem that we can get into. But I think, at least in Wolfenstein,
Like the femboy Hitler community.
yeah, you're always blasting the Nazis in the face with shotguns, which I think is a pretty good tack to take.
Yeah, I support that as an angle.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
so wait, this is a historical game then?
Not even remotely. Wolfenstein is very much like Man in the High Castle kind of thing.
Okay.
It's alt history, and it's science fiction. So you've got Mecha Hitler, right? It's an alternate history where the Nazis were extremely competent scientists, you know, kind of going off the von Braun thing, and managed to craft like robot armies and stuff, basically. And Nazis conquered the world in this alt history. America has been taken by the Nazis, and we'll get into that a little later because that's got a lot going on. But yeah, the older games are mostly, you know, the original game is set in Castle Wolfenstein, where you're like going into Germany in what is ostensibly World War II, but with mechs, and trying to kill Hitler, right? So that's the idea. It's always shooting the Nazis, which I give a thumbs up.
The objective of the first game is literally kill Hitler.
Yeah, well, I don't know if that's the only objective, but it's definitely part of it. You most certainly kill Hitler in that game. You kill Hitler multiple times throughout the franchise. It's pretty great.
Does he keep coming back?
It's kind of like different reboots, right? So there's been a few reboots of the Wolfenstein franchise. One in 2007, and the more recent one being in 2013, I believe.
He's just cloning himself like Emperor Palpatine. Spoilers, I guess. I don't
Spoilers,
know.
yeah, spoilers for the worst Star Wars movie. Oh boy, that was probably a controversial statement. Oh god, maybe that'll be the controversial statement that gets us gets
The
us
episode's all
notoriety.
about Nazis, and this thing is like, well, as we have a big discussion over how they view the Star Wars franchise.
Yeah. So that's the mechanics of it. Like I said, it's honestly quite simple. There's not really much else I can say regarding the actual playing of the game besides you do a hell of a lot of Nazi killing.
So you mentioned, and when you say it's kind of like, so it's just kind of cartoonish, right? You're dual wielding
Yeah,
assault rifles, just I imagine mowing people down.
yeah, it's cartoonish violence, but the narrative is not always cartoonish, if that makes sense. Particularly the newer games. So the New Order and the New Colossus, I would say, are actually quite surprisingly deep in their narrative construction. The hero BJ Blazkowicz in these newer games is like your typical action 80s shoot man, but he's given a really sincere depth, and like he's shown, at his most vulnerable, he loves and cherishes those around him. He's not just a badass action hero who doesn't care about anybody. He has like a family that he wants to protect. He has friends that he surrounds himself with, and you get a lot of those more vulnerable, sentimental moments, which I think really adds to the artistry of it. And that's what impressed me most about the newer games. It's just the actual depth with which the setting was presented and the characters, given that it's a big muscle man shoots Nazis with two machine guns.
And you're saying is it more science fiction, or is there occult stuff going on? Is it, because I know like Hellboy is a great example of someone who leans into the whole occult Nazis thing.
Yeah, definitely. You have both. There's in the second reboot of Wolfenstein, there's more of the occult stuff where there's like ghost zombie Nazis and stuff like that. The newer ones is much more heavy on the tech dystopia side of it.
Interesting.
Although there certainly are like ancient tablets and that kind of thing that are the objects of the Nazi interest in America.
Oh, is the Tula Society involved?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with that.
Those are, if you've seen Hellboy, those are the guys who like employ Rasputin and the weird self surgery dude.
Yeah,
Those guys.
yeah. I don't think specifically, but there is like in the end of the second of the newer games, there is an extended section where you're breaking into like a Nazi lab, basically. That's kind of, or sorry, I think that might be in Youngblood. In one of the newer games, basically, you're breaking into one of these occult laboratories where they're studying these like ancient artifacts that are, I think, implied to be from hell, but I'm not certain.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's a, so like there is this, so I think there's an interesting thing about how like the Nazi occultism is perceived, because there was a weird trend of it. Like, one of the founders of the Nazi Party, the guy who kind of created the Hitler myth, was a poet named Dietrich Eckart, who had one big hit and then blamed his succeeding theatrical failures, because also playwright, on the Jews. Fairly common through line. He was a member of the Tula Society. I think he might have been like a co-founder, or at least he popularized it as sort of like a social club for the well-to-do to sort of indulge in an interest in the occult.
Yeah.
And then Rudolf Hess, who was Hitler's bestest buddy and kind of had a mental crack up. I think this was Hess. In like 42, he piloted a plane to try, like alone, to try and go to Britain and sue for peace, and he crashed the plane.
Oh.
He was probably bipolar, and he was probably really, really going.
Mm-hmm.
Another aspect of this is the small ocean of methamphetamine on which Nazi Germany operated.
Yeah.
And possibly the most famous one of these guys, Hitler was not one of them. Hitler was not a man who believed in much else other than Adolf Hitler is an awesome dude.
Yeah.
But one of the most famous adherents of this was Himmler.
Yeah.
Who believed himself, I think, to be the reincarnation of a Danish prince.
Oh yeah, I think I remember hearing about that. Yeah.
And he had like these parties with the SS, because he was the head of the SS. He had parties with these SS dudes at his castle where he made them act like knights and probably did a lot of weird sexual shenanigans.
Yeah, they're cosplaying Knights of the Round Table, basically, in as much as you can in 1940s Germany.
I mean, it seemed to be a thing that was very dear to him. I mean, they kind of all had it, right? Goebbels was obsessed with making his masterpiece movie. Goering
Mhm.
was just really big on opiates. Like,
Yeah,
everyone.
Hitler was obsessed with old Shatterhand.
Oh yeah, Karl May.
Yeah,
The great Behind the Bastards episode on that.
yeah.
I mean, he was also. There's a great book I highly recommend. We're getting into a bit of a tangent here. It's called Blitz by Norman Ohler.
Oh, that's the one about the drug use in the tanks and stuff, or the
In the
planes. I can't remember.
entirety of Nazi Germany. Like,
Right,
it's
right.
interesting because Weimar Germany, cocaine and morphine were really big, both injected,
Hmm.
very common in sort of the bohemian scene there. Germany produced like pharmaceutical cocaine, a lot of pharmaceutical drugs at the time. You actually get references that Keith Richards, in his biography, was still describing like the really fluffy Merck cocaine. I don't actually know what Keith Richards. I can't remember what Keith Richards sounds like. I imagine it's a little more slurred than that.
Mm.
He's describing that, and that's in the 70s. That's well after this was as popular as it was. When the Nazis came to power, because they've got a lot of propaganda about drugs being race poisons, but they also, meth is completely legal and encouraged because it
Yeah.
makes you more productive, increases your sex drive, whatever. They had these little pink pills called Pervitin that people were just popping like Tic Tacs. And they also had, among other things, chocolates for Valentine's Day that contained 2.5 doses of Pervitin. Happy Valentine's Day, honey! Still got
Yeah.
some teeth left.
So sorry, was Pervitin an amphetamine as well, or just a stimulant, or
Meth and
meth?
cake
Okay.
base. Yeah, like
Ah,
just
I see.
basically little tablets of meth.
Yeah, yeah.
They called it pilot salt in the Luftwaffe.
Yes, that's
In
right.
the Wehrmacht, there's a theory that the reason they were able to just get around the Maginot Line at such speed they did was
Hmm.
because they just told everyone here, you're not going to sleep for Fritz, you're not going to sleep for 36 hours, all right? So here's what's going to help you with that. What about after 36 hours? I don't know. You hit the English channel, just keep going.
Yeah.
And that's how they think they got it.
Yeah.
This is diminishing returns. It actually does show this really doesn't work for wars of attrition, which,
Mm.
if you know about how the Germans fared when they got to Russia,
Yeah.
becomes pretty hilarious with the
Well, yeah,
accomplishment.
when you've got a bunch of your soldiers addicted to amphetamines and they start going through withdrawal because you can't get any meth to the front lines, I mean, yeah, you're going to start to see some pretty diminishing goddamn returns.
Well, not even withdrawal. Like, you had problems of like, if you take meth for too much, like one of the things with meth is its effect on your nervous system is really horrifying, even in the short term. So if you
Mm.
keep taking it, like your brain doesn't recover the happy juice, and eventually you start to get what is essentially premature dementia. As far as I'm
Oh,
aware, I am
Christ.
not a doctor. Just for the record, just legally proclaiming, not a doctor. Also, don't do meth. Don't have to be a doctor to recommend that. But
Yeah.
you would get people going like out of their heads. You had people dying of like heart attacks in their 30s.
Christ.
The doctor who did like essentially the mass prescription of meth for the Wehrmacht
Hmm.
was also one of the first to notice the side effects being really, really bad. He was also very addicted to meth, and it eventually destroyed him. And you
Yeah.
can see this in his notes. This is all in the book. This is the mental state the Nazis are operating at for most of the
Mhm.
war. And when I think about this in relation to Wolfenstein, just looping it back around,
I have a few things to mention as well related, but you go first.
it's one of those things where if you get a bunch of like scientists tasked with defeating your enemies, and then you get them gacked up on whoop chicken, then you will get ideas. Like the actual idea they
Yeah.
had was a giant gun that required 2 railway tracks to move.
Oh yeah, I've seen that fucking thing. It looks hilarious.
Yep, it fired, I think, like 50 rounds and then shattered
Yeah.
because
That
physics.
sounds about goddamn right. I think you're hitting on something. So the thing that I wanted to loop back to myself was regarding the occultism thing, and regarding the kind of techno sciencey angle of a lot of these kind of alt history stories, is that they framed the Nazis in both cases, in the occultism case and in the techno future case, as being extremely competent in some regard, and that is completely off base. I think, like, what the idea of like the Nazis like discovering some hidden occult knowledge kind of plays into the idea that they knew something that the rest of the world didn't, right? Which seems to me dangerously close to like saying, oh, well, maybe they were actually right. Maybe they knew what they were talking about. Because you're saying, oh, they knew about, these ancient aliens or whatever. Maybe they were also right about X other thing. And I'm talking about that in regards to how people, on these History Channel documentaries talk about this stuff. Not saying that like Hellboy is like fashy because it has Nazi occultism. I'm saying in the way that people genuinely believe some of this stuff. And same with the techno future stuff. It's like giving I believe the Nazi Nazi scientists a lot more credit than they probably deserve, given, as you pointed out, some of the wild inefficiency of some of the ideas they came up with, experimenting with flying saucers and shit like that.
Well, I mean, there was something too. I mean, when we talk about like guys like Werner von Braun, right? Like there were people, V weapons became the space program, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I think is interesting is when you tell stories about Nazis, it's one of those things that really does reveal a lot about the author.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like the reason this is so much the case with Nazis is because, and Wolfenstein is definitely a part of this, they have this really saturated place as the ultimate evil.
Yeah.
And this is interesting because I have a couple questions about the tone.
Yes.
Have I mentioned to you that there is a film called Ilsa She-Wolf of the SS?
You have talked to me about this before. Is that the one that Walt Disney was in? Or is that the other werewolf one?
No, that's Werewolf in a Girl's Dormitory.
Oh, okay. Okay. Different movies, right?
Yes. No Nazis in that one, except for possibly Walt Disney. And Ilsa She-Wolf of the SS is not a werewolf movie.
Oh, okay.
It's softcore porn, pretty much. I guess it's actually not real. It's an exploitation film from the 70s, starring I guess kind of like proto Pamela Anderson-esque blonde woman named Diane Thorne, Canadian actually, as the warden of a concentration camp.
Yeah.
And there is an American prisoner there who what she will do is she will have relations with prisoners and then castrate them if they are unable to put up a satisfying performance.
Christ.
Seem a little tasteless?
Yeah, that's about as tone deaf as you can get, although I imagine it somehow gets worse, yeah.
There is an American prisoner who realizes that he can forestall ejaculation indefinitely. Just many games of baseball thought of. And essentially, he is able to quite literally do like the softcore pornographic version of The Great Escape. This movie was filmed on the set of Hogan's Heroes, a marginally less tasteless sitcom. Set also in a prison camp.
Yeah.
Have you heard about this?
I've heard of Hogan's Heroes. Yeah, I don't know much about it, but
like Colonel Klink, right? Like that's one of the touchstones I think is. But Hogan's Heroes is probably worse than Wolfenstein, and it might be worse than the Ilsa movie was.
It was certainly a lot more well known than the She-Wolf of the SS, I imagine. Like Hogan's Heroes is a bit of a household name, or at least was, right?
Yeah, I mean, my parents remember seeing it on the television back in the day.
Yeah. So your question then kind of looping back around is how does the tone of the game relate to this kind of schlock? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, kind of, because I've seen like Nazis. There's Nazi exploitation. There's the Inglorious Bastards kind of thing where it's influenced by that, but it's very sincerely, it's a throwback to a different kind of thing. There is the very, very serious films, Schindler's List, Boy in Striped Pajamas, that kind of thing. And then there is whatever the fuck Hogan's Heroes was.
Well, I think that, and I'm speaking of the newer games now because I don't really think the old games even have that much of a narrative to discuss. Like, tonally, the original games are just basically Doom with Nazis. Like, that's the only, difference there is that in one game, you're shooting demons from hell, and in another game, you're shooting Nazis. Both great games, mind you. Like, the original Wolfenstein and the original Doom are some of the, most well-known, well-regarded shooters of all time for a reason. But the newer games, I would certainly place in, of all those kind of touchstones you mentioned, probably closest to something like Inglorious Bastards, where it's very, very clearly anti-Nazi,
Mhm.
and it's very, very clearly, a bit left wing in tone, or in like political slant, I guess. I think that it's genuinely really sincere with its characterization of the oppressed, at least in the new one. And what I think is really powerful about the way that these games kind of use, like Inglorious Bastards does, use hyper violence as a method of catharsis for kind of like, that way in which any oppressed people can understand why someone would want to blast a Nazi's face off, right? Like it's a really, really strong sense of catharsis. And in Wolfenstein 2, the New Colossus, like you get the most powerful moment of this, which is old man Hitler, who's become a film director on the planet Venus, is trying to cast your main character in his movie about your main character that's supposed to be a propaganda piece. And old man Hitler is so senile he can't recognize the target of his own attack ad. So you go in and you are just given the freedom to kill Hitler in whatever manner you see fit. Now that's brilliant. Like that's just one of gaming's greatest moments right there. Is just, here's a room, here's Adolf fucking Hitler, and here's 12 machine guns, all that perform in different ways that you can choose to use to execute this man. Like, you can't get any better than that.
There's the thing about so just there's a lot to unpack there.
Oh, we haven't even gotten to the best part yet, but I'm saving it.
Because I'm getting a bit of like an Iron Sky vibe from this. I should have mentioned that earlier because that does fit the Nazi science fiction thing. Because there's a few of those too. I realize this.
Yeah. I was going for the Man in the High Castle comparison. I'm not familiar with Iron Sky. What's this?
Well, I mean, it's funny because in The Man in the High Castle, I haven't seen the series, but I have read the book. And in that one,
Yeah.
it's like, well, Hitler disappeared. They think he's somewhere in maybe up in the mountains in Germany because he may or may not have syphilis, and that might have really kind of rotted his brain.
Mm-hmm.
Which that's one of the things. I mean, that's one of the things is about a question about Hitler was did he have some form of brain decay from that? And I think in Blitzed, that might have actually been withdrawal from morphine.
Yeah.
Is what Norman Ohler advances there. But it is interesting because Simon Wiesenthal, who was a famous Nazi hunter, went to his grave believing that the reason Hitler hated Jewish people was because he was given syphilis by a Jewish prostitute, which is a very complex thing for someone to hold in their head, especially someone who experienced the horrors of it as Simon Wiesenthal did.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting through line there. But what's the other part? Sorry, that was a bit of a digression.
I want no. You mentioned Iron Sky though. I'm still not clear on what that is. Is this like?
It's the Nazis on the moon one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
But they were on the dark side of the moon this whole time, and they come back. I haven't seen the movie.
I just googled it, and Hitler's on a T-Rex. What the hell?
What?
I don't know if this is the same thing, but Hitler's on a Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Let me see here.
There's like multiple images of Hitler on a T-Rex. I don't know what.
Oh, I see it. Yep, I think that's the one. Like the frontispiece is a blonde woman who looks kinda like Diane Thorne as Ilsa. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of what was the one you were mentioning? We watched a while ago where it was the one we watched. Oh, Kung Fury.
Oh yeah, Kung Fury. Yeah. We're that's similar thing going on there. Yeah,
I've seen that symbol somewhere before.
I think we've now gotten completely off the track though. Sorry. So yeah, Iron Sky, the Nazis on the moon thing. Definitely the newer Wolfenstein games take a bit of that. Like you do go to the moon in Wolfenstein: The New Order. You know, it's the Nazi moon base thing, which is a real conspiracy theory. Let's be clear; it's not just something invented by that movie. There's people who legitimately believe that the Nazis have a moon base active at this moment. There's people who legitimately believe that there's Nazis living in the core of the Earth, like out there in the world right now.
Well, no, that's the mole people. Eric, you got to get it right.
No, it's both.
Mole people live in the core of the earth, and also the Pellucidarians, And then the Nazis live in Antarctica.
That's right. Yes,
That's
that's right.
clearly it. It's them and the penguins. Have you ever noticed when the penguins just move their wings like this, they're saluting?
That was a visual gag, everyone. Jake saluted like a penguin. Although,
Sort of flapping the arms to the side.
however you're imagining it is probably more exciting than it actually looked. Sorry to say so, Jake, but
Fair enough. Fair enough.
maybe if you were standing, it might have worked better.
I don't think we want to do that. They're just getting close to Doctor Strangelove territory.
So, going back to the other tonal element that I wanted to talk about, because this is the big thing that I alluded to at the start of the episode that I think is the really fun topic about Wolfenstein, and it pertains to Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus, which is the second most recent game, and I believe probably the best one that they've made. And that the reason that I think it's so good is not just because it's mechanically fun, like it's a good shooter and all, but it tackles the subject of a Nazi occupation of America in a really, really fascinating kind of allegorical way, where it's showing you how different would this really be from America as it is now. And the conclusion that the game seems to come to is that besides a few flags and zeppelins here and there, that realistically things probably wouldn't be all that different. Like, there's a lot of scenes involving things like police violence, which in this case are at the hands of, Nazi police, SS officers, but that's a reality for people living in the United States right now, right? And it's these kinds of things, the reality of white supremacists and the Ku Klux Klan being friends to the Nazis. Your own protagonist, his father gave up his own wife to the Nazis in the hope that he would, kind of ingratiate himself to them. And sorry, I believe she was Jewish in the game. Which is,
okay.
yeah, the important thing there. Sorry, I forgot to mention. But yeah, you see this kind of, this reality that Nazism taking hold in America, at the time of the game's release, and now, which is 3 years ago the game came out, like this game was released during the Trump presidency. It was released, very shortly after the Unite the Right rally, that kind of thing. And the idea of Nazis like occupying America and like the question of how different that would really be is, I think, a very fascinating one to explore with this kind of fiction. And our protagonists, our heroes in this game, are they're revolutionaries of a sort. There's black characters who are very, very ardent in their ideology that basically they can't trust white men to actually do anything to resist the Nazis because they directly benefit from the Nazis being in power, right? That kind of thing. And it's a remarkably more potent cultural critique than I ever would have expected from a game in which you shoot space Hitler with machine guns, right? And now, the thing that I wanted to talk about, and I'll let you respond to this whole spiel first, but there's an article from The Verge that I would like to send you afterwards, and we can discuss that as well. Send it in the chat. I wanted to give you a chance to respond to that whole diatribe first, though, if you had anything to say about that.
That diatribe about it? Oh, yeah. Well, one question I was kind of thinking about, so going back to Man in the High Castle, one detail in Man in the High Castle I find very interesting is that I think one of the American Obergruppenführers, so one of the American higher-ups in the SS, is George Lincoln Rockwell. If that name sounds familiar, they always have three names, don't they? He's the guy who invented the term white power.
Right.
He is one of the most important people in considering like how neo-Nazism was created. He arguably created it.
Mm-hmm.
He was a World War II veteran fighting for the Americans. I do want to say this, and he was an early Holocaust denier.
Yeah.
He was a really fascinating kind of scumbag because he was killed by one of his own guys, and his legacy still remains. There's, what was it, in Detroit? Like in Detroit, there's been like a hate music scene there for a while. Like there's a lot of Hammerskins in Detroit.
Mm.
A lot of Hammerskins. There's not a lot of Hammerskins anywhere, but like relative to everywhere else. And they used to, like, I think they kept a lot of Rockwell's work in print. And I know this because there was a Canadian musician named George Birdie who used who went to prison for moving this stuff across, went to jail, I think, or maybe prison, for moving this stuff across the border.
Mm.
That's still alive there. I don't know if I have an organized thought on that exactly. I mean, the comparison to contemporaneity, like the idea of the alternate history, I'm always a little cautious of that. I understand where it comes from. I mean, I
Hmm.
understand the desire to study that because I think that studying Weimar in particular, studying what happened to Weimar Germany, is a very interesting thing to kind of do with post '08 America.
Yeah.
There's an element there. I think there's a lot of fertile ground for that. I think that there's like certainly enough leeway if you're going to put it into something creative, though definitely a leeway to create something with that.
Yeah. I think you're right though that it's important to be careful of hyperbole because realistically, like the question of the game is how different would Nazi America be from modern America? But that's not the same as saying that, for example, the Republican Party are Nazis, right? That because I also agree that that's probably a pretty fraught comparison to make. It's not baseless, but it's hyperbolic to be sure. I think.
I think one thing that there's a political scientist named Paul Gottfried. He's the guy who coined the term alt right. He's also the guy who coined the term paleo-conservative. He is an advocate of, I would argue, both schools of thought,
Mm,
and he was Richard Spencer's mentor as well.
I see.
Very ironic thing for it for a Jewish man to have been. He
Yeah.
himself has commented on this several times. He avows the point that essentially Nazism is a historical phenomenon, but does no longer apply because the factors that created it are not really applicable.
Mm,
I think that Gottfried has Gottfried very obviously has a motive for believing this.
yeah.
There is something the way Gottfried makes the argument, I think, is very worth noting because it is a misdirect. It
Yeah.
certainly is. I think he's smart enough to know that. But there is this element when you talk about it, when you say Nazi, neo-Nazi, what have you, those are like there are different things in operation, and it's very sinister because they do recombine. They do still live.
Hmm.
There's who was the joke? I think this was Nazism is like champagne. If it's not from Germany, it's just sparkling fascism. But Nazism is a very specific cocktail of this mixture of like one thing is the influences, right? The Völkisch movement, the impact that Wagner's opera had on young incel Hitler because he was. There's a lot that coalesced into that,
Hmm.
and working on that, recombining that, seeing it as a piece of history, the same way that
Yeah.
there are a lot of other pieces of history in use that way. There's more of those than I mean, very few of them have gotten the same press, but there's an element of specificity. This is a very circuitous way to say there's an element of specificity that I keep thinking about.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things, if we want to talk about Wolfenstein, is the way that Wolfenstein is very much, I'm assuming, a recombination of that. Because you get to the
Yeah.
point where you're imagining what they would imagine Mecca would look like,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
what their moon base would look like. That's a continuation where there was a severance,
Hmm.
which I think is an interesting bit of art.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I want to just I want to step back for one moment, kind of to the beginning of what you were saying there, and to the point that we were getting at before, which is the element of specificity, like in calling, say, the modern Republican Party, like they even now, but during the years that Trump was in power, that kind of thing. That's not new. The ways in which the Republican Party is horrible now have happened before in the Republican Party. There was internment camps for Japanese folks, in World War II, and that was not unique to the United States either, right? And I think you're right that the specificity is important in that case because while there are neo Nazis in America right now, and while they certainly have a startling amount of political power, the Republican Party has been plenty shit in its own right without being Nazis before.
Exactly. They don't have a monopoly on evil. They were just very good at it.
Yeah, yeah. And aesthetically, like, I mean, there's something to be said for black and red. It's a good color scheme, you know? It's it just screams I'm an asshole, you know?
The the thing that I do think of here, and I think, oh Damn, did I lose it? I think I'm gonna. What did this article? Is this article you sent me just a review of the YouTube comments for something?
Yeah, we can get into that if you'd like. If you want to give any final thoughts on what we were talking about before, though, now is probably the time. Okay, you seem distracted by the article. Okay, why don't you read the title of this article from The Verge out loud for me?
All right, here we go. K-Mag Yo-Yo. Watching internet Nazis get mad at Wolfenstein 2 is sadder than the game's actual dystopia.
That's right. So what this article is kind of a small look into the internet's reaction to Wolfenstein 2's portrayal of fascist America, of a Nazi America. And as you can see from some of the YouTube comments they feature in the article, I'll leave the article link in the description as well. Neo Nazis were not very happy about this game.
Why?
Yeah, right. Well, what's quite remarkable to me about this is that usually when you see, internet outrage about one game or another, usually it's because the game has done something that's decidedly uncomfortably close to being pro-Nazi. In this case, it was the opposite. These are, fascy right-wingers, neo-Nazis, the alt-right, all those guys coming out of the woodwork to complain about the fact that, among other things, that the game allows you to kill Nazis in violent ways, that a black woman is quote-unquote racist towards white people, and that it depicts a left-wing resistance in the United States of America. This was the subject of their complaints that they leveled against this game. These people left, horrible comments on the YouTube trailers for the game. You can see some of these comments in the reviews for the game on Steam, although a lot of those reviews have been removed. But yeah, this was the level of discourse about the game around the time of its release.
I'm just distracted by the fact that there is a man named Pepe von Europa who has a rainbow Sonnenrad as his avatar.
Can you imagine? There's two possibilities. Either one, that guy's actual real name is Pepe von Europa, or two, that he thought that was a cool enough internet pseudonym to use for his fashy YouTube account.
Eric, I am a betting man. Some have said that I am perhaps overly so. I am going to bet on the latter.
Yeah, I think that's probably
also
a good
against my faith in humanity, but on the
yeah.
latter.
Yeah. Oh man, Pepe von Europa.
The thing that occurs to me here, and this is kind of like this is the thing I got sidetracked from before I'm, trying to read this review of comments, including this is anti-Nazi propaganda.
I mean, that's not wrong. It is anti-Nazi propaganda, but I would say that that's probably decidedly a good thing.
It's like you ever watched Der Fuhrer's face?
No, what's that?
It's the Disney cartoon where Donald Duck is a Nazi.
Oh, okay.
And it's a joke about I can't do it. I can't do a good Daffy Duck, but he Sig Heils so much. The joke is primarily he Sig Heils a great deal. The thing that I wanted to loop around to, kind of the follow-up before I was distracted, was that this is a thing both Nazism classic flavor and neo-Nazism do, is they're very syncretic.
Mm.
They just take little bits of everything and kind of just recombine it into things.
Yeah.
One example of that is like a lot of the things the Nazis did in order to, like, the Volkisch movement is kind of this, because it's an attempt to manufacture essentially a nationhood that has been eternal for a thing that existed kind of really picked up steam at the start of the 19th century, and then 1870 becomes the nation of Germany.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of that going on. So you have that build up, and neo-Nazis are very much that. That's how they meme too. But like that's what Savitri Devi did. That's what Savitri Devi was, a Greek woman who became a Hindu nationalist and a Nazi. I don't have time to go into that right now, but good God. The thing that I find interesting about that, and again, I'm bringing it back to Wolfenstein. It seems to be the thing is we got to keep bringing it back here. I've got to imagine part of the act of imagining a future that involves, Nazis classic flavor does involve imagining what gets sucked into the blend and what demented roots that takes. Again, this thing guided by a bunch of creeps who are on
Right.
very high grade meth and like pouring lead into buckets of water to see if it'll resolve into shapes that determine the future. That's an actual thing they did. Yeah. Oh, good lord.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to consider. They. I think the intention of these newer games is very clear, to me at least. But it is fascinating to talk about the ways in which even considering how Nazis might have taken America or what elements of that culture they might have bastardized or adopted. It's interesting to consider that as a kind of historical exercise because to really create a kind of powerful, meaningful work, you have to kind of understand what it is that you're criticizing, right? And I think that probably leads a lot of the writers of these games into some very uncomfortable situations with their search histories, for example. Googling things like a SS uniform followed by Mein Kampf full text PDF, that kind of thing, over and over again, right? And I do wonder if there's a danger in creating art like that, just on the artists themselves. Like, what does exposing yourself to that kind of shit every single day for a period of several years developing a video game actually add up to, right?
Well, I can't imagine it's a good time.
No, I can't imagine so
I would
either.
hope it's not, except for like there's going to be one guy who's like, Trevor's really happy about this.
Yeah,
We're all worried about it.
yeah, he's so excited to be working on the Nazi UFO 3D models.
He's like, guys, I've been waiting for this for a while.
Nobody show him the final game. Nobody let him see the script.
Just let it roll on. That'll actually help him get the juices flowing.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, is that kind of what you were getting at? Is that there's potentially a danger in that kind of synthesis, or are you more on the positive on that kind of thing?
Well, I think it's a crapshoot. I legitimately don't think you can tell what you can do with art a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Like, it's one of the things where I don't think Hogan's Heroes is made by Nazis. I do think that there is at least one piece of art about Nazis that is legitimately good at deflating them. That piece of art is The Producers.
Yes, okay.
You seen that movie?
I haven't, but I'm familiar with the concept, yeah. That's by Matt and Trey, right?
No.
No? Okay, I'm thinking of something else then.
Mel Brooks, who
Mel Brooks,
actually
right.
did fight in World War II against the Nazis.
Yeah,
And he's still, as far as I'm aware, still alive. God love you, Mel. He's lived a long and amazing life. Actually, let me check on that.
Yeah, I was shocked to discover he was still alive a week ago. I was for sure that he had died.
Good God, he's 95 years old.
Yeah, that's a good run.
What a champ. Yeah, the thing with him, right? I mean, like, I love The Producers. It's a great movie. That movie has, Kenneth Mars as a guy who is essentially Martin Bormann, hanging out and is very clearly a Nazi and very bad at hiding it. And then this guy is responsible for one of my favorite lines in a movie, which is, "You was the audience, I am the Asa, I outrank you!" But that is a kind of an encapsulation of what this is. I mean, for what we're talking about, but also that movie, neo-Nazis do not like that movie because it does not make them look cool.
Yeah.
It makes them look like what most of them are, which is a bunch of idiots.
Yeah.
A kind of an amazing way to organize evolutionary dead ends under an ideology. And this character it comes from a place of genuine anger for Mel Brooks. There is Mel Brooks hates the movie Life is Beautiful because he thinks it's too chipper an approach to concentration camps, which is a pretty reasonable point.
Yeah.
I can see Mel Brooks believing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
The thing that I find interesting when we talk about that, also this quote too, because there's the other element of this, I am the audience, I outrank you. The point is, the joke is that is not true. And it isn't. I don't think it is. Springtime for Hitler, in the context of The Producers. This is a spoiler, so watch the movie, please do. Springtime for Hitler, which is the play he writes, it's a musical, is perceived to be a comedy, which it is not.
Yeah.
And it becomes a runaway hit because it is a comedy.
Right.
Because people think it's hilarious, because they don't think it can be possibly sincere. This is, in one respect, possibly the most optimistic one of the most optimistic things a person could be about media consuming public in general. But there
Yeah.
is something to be said for that. You really can't tell which way it breaks a lot of the time. And the way that it does is usually a testament to the quality of the author's vision, but other times it is quite literally just chance.
Yeah.
Like one thing that has come up, and the thing that I kind of gestured at the beginning, so many digressions ago, was that the Wolfenstein made Nazis look cool to people,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And then that is some of them ran with that aesthetic. Some of them just ended up kind of dickering about some of them just thought Nazis were less serious. Some of them thought deeper things. Like the thing about that is that there's no way to control it. There's no way to see which way it breaks. There's more and less responsible ways to make things.
Mm-hmm.
There are some exceptions, but I, in large part, don't think that it's really easy to infer what way that is.
Yeah.
Because you are but one moving part in a gigantic, not a machine, an ecology of media as far as that goes, and an ecology of culture, and whether or not you spell that with a K or whatever, you are part of that. You form this, what is basically this gigantic syncretic union. And with the internet especially, the ways that goes are kind of infinite. The number of recombinations are amazing. It's one of those things where kind of almost all propaganda works, but also no propaganda works the way it's intended.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when it comes down to like asking if something like Wolfenstein or a lot of other things like make someone more likely to be a Nazi, even if so, I don't really know how to break that down into authorial liability unless the author is pretty indisputably, and you should be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was going to mention, like, I think you've just brought us to a very brilliant conclusion there. But I want to get at something I think that you've touched on quite brilliantly and eloquently, is that the ways in which Nazis appropriate the aesthetic traditions of various media, various cultures, and even up until now in the neo-Nazi movement, multi-billion-dollar film franchises is quite insidious. Like, you need look no further than the obsession with the Empire in Star Wars, right? The fact that you have at Disneyland what are basically as close to SS officers, cosplayers as you could get, walking around, and they're, playing with children. That's like, it's Star Wars, it's fun, it's for kids, but there's a way in which that concept of the ultimate villainy feeds into the way we portray villains in media, and then feeds right back into the villains themselves. And that there is a danger in that. I think that's apt.
I mean, this is me kind of taking pot shots at it, which is like, I think one of the best things, and this is something the producers teach us, but it's also something who they were teaches us, is that the people who ran the Nazi party, for people who railed on about degeneracy all the time, were a bunch of fucking degenerates.
Yeah.
Like, they were a bunch of really, like, this was like, we need the tall blondes men. And if you've seen pictures of, Hitler or Goebbels, I mean, a lot of these guys, what they did, it does not square to it. It's one of these fundamental misconnections of figuration, this fundamental misconnection of desire with reality that I think informs a lot of people's engagement with politics, but is also fundamental as to how we deal with art. And it will always be. Like I mentioned this before, Dietrich Eckart was a poet. The phrase that, when I hear the word culture, I reach for my gun. Not Hitler or Goebbels, not the original line, but it was a Nazi who wrote that. And it's from a play, I think, called Schlageter, which is about like a guy they claimed as a hero in retrospect. And the line is, when I hear the word culture, I release the safety catch on my Browning. I don't know. I always read it as they just speed up there.
Yeah.
None of it squares to anything. It is less than the sum of its parts. And I think in kind of this uniquely perverse way because of the many like horrors it created and does continue to create. Yeah. But I think there's something very funny in that, where there is, if you create a work of art, a good work of art about that figuration, about, for example, what a Nazi's idea of the future would look like, and then you make the point of that to pulverize them with comedically large machine guns. That is somehow a smoother accomplishment. That is somehow a more, like, in terms of, the effort put into it to the ultimate, the Kunsteffekt or what have you. I can't remember. I don't speak German. Sorry. Sorry to the nation of Germany in this. It is greater than the exercise.
Yeah.
What any of these dipshits ended up doing. I don't know if that was very clear there. but it's an amazing thing because of how these guys just deeply, deeply felt about that.
Yeah, I think we should also be clear that, like you kind of got at earlier, that we're not necessarily holding the artists liable for the ways in which Nazis have interpreted their works, right?
No.
Like you say, it's a crapshoot. I think especially given the response we see in this Verge article from neo-Nazis about these games, it's pretty hard to misinterpret shooting Adolf Hitler with a machine gun the size of a human being.
There you go. A picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yeah. Well, do you have any final thoughts, Jake? I think this has been remarkably more insightful than I expected. Given
Now,
the
we've gone a
subject.
while.
Yeah.
Many digressions about the past, present, and possible future
Yeah.
of some unfortunate fellas, some
Yeah.
distasteful players in the human drama.
Yeah.
I was gonna sum this up as because I thought there were werewolves for some reason. I thought there were like vampires and werewolves. I didn't know it was mechas. I completely missed that.
Yeah.
I was gonna sum it up as Underworld meets The Cross of Iron. It's a Sam Peckinpah movie about Nazis.
Mm.
I'm gonna say we got mechas, right? We got Venus. We got a lot of things going on. I feel like if I knew more about anime, I'd be able to pull something out about this, but I don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's say the man in the high castle on some of that sweet, sweet methamphetamine.
That's apt. Yeah, I was going to say something like Inglorious Bastards meets Evangelion, but I don't think that's as
Oh,
accurate.
I like that. Yep, Inglorious Bastards meets Evangelion. Here
Maybe
we go.
Maybe Gundam. Evangelion's a little. That's a topic for another time. We'll talk about Evangelion someday.
That's the controversy.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I think this was, given the subject matter of this episode, probably remarkably more insightful than it could have been, given that it's basically a game about shooting Nazis in the head. So I want to say thanks, Jake, for bringing me along on this journey. Or maybe I brought you along? I don't know.
Look, the important thing is we made it to the end, stepping over a river of shredded SS officers. We got to it.
We got to the point, yes. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and I hope you've enjoyed this conversation.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers, and
Bye, friend.
Punch your local Nazi. Am I allowed to say that?
To be clear, that was not in fact, a legally actionable call to violence.
All right.
As far as you know.
I think we should cut it there before I say too much.
That's fairly good. Cheers, everybody.